joined by Jason Furman, who's chair of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. And we're going to talk about one specific aspect of the economy today, which is pretty interesting. Basically, the job market has improved enormously over the last several years. The unemployment rate, which touched 10% during the worst of the Great Recession, is now below 5%. But the recovery has been incomplete, and we are learning that there are a lot of chronic problems in the economy that are now getting attention because some of the shorter-term problems have been solved. And one of the most striking to me is that the fraction of men between the age of 25 and 54, prime age men who are mostly too old to be in school and mostly too young to be retired by our conventional standards, are not working or looking for work. And this decline in what's called the labor market participation rate of prime age men is something that Jason and his colleagues at the CEA have been focused on. They wrote a report about it that came out in June, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening, why it's happening, and what might be done about it. So, Jason, maybe I can just start with the facts. If you look over the last several decades, what has happened to the fraction of prime age men who are working or looking for work?
The fraction of prime age men who are working or looking for work has fallen continuously since the 1950s. In the early 1950s, 98% of men in that age bracket had a job. Most of them had a job, or the ones that didn't were actively looking for one. Today, that fraction has fallen down to 88%, and that process pretty much took place over about a half century.
So if you look at all the men between these eight in this prime age group, 12% of them aren't even looking for work.
That's right.
Wow.
They have given up looking for work, and for most of them, when we look at them, they didn't have a job the year before and weren't looking for work the year before either. This isn't just I'll take a month off from searching for a job. This seems to be, for the bulk of these men, a real long-run state for them.
So people always wonder when I talk about prime age men, well, what about the women? So let's just talk about women. What's happened to women's labor force participation?
With women, up until the year 2000, you saw women's labor force participation rising. And that's as a process that started at the end of World War II of women entering the workforce and continued up through 2000. Since 2000, that process seems to have played itself out, at least in the U.S. data, and women since the year 2000 look a lot like men with the same downward trajectory for their labor force participation rate.
Okay, so when you look at the men, so 12%, that's something like 1 in 9 men aren't working or looking for work. What do we know about these guys?
We know that they're disproportionately without a high school education. They're disproportionately poor. We know a little bit about how they spend their time. They're not spending any more time on child care. They're not spending any more time on chores. They are spending a lot more time watching television than the men who are in the workforce.
So is that the silver lining or the dark lining?
I think I grew up thinking that was the dark lining.
I see, okay. Are these, do we know, are some of these guys just lucky enough to have women who make lots of money so they don't have to work?
Right. There's generally been two classes of explanations for why this has happened. One class I'd call the supply side, and that is these men don't want to work. And there's a bunch of reasons they may not want to work. One is they could be married to a woman that is working. And with so many more women working today than 50 years ago, you'd think that might be the case. It turns out this group of men isn't married to the working women.
A lot of them aren't married at all, right?
A lot of them aren't married at all. Only about 1 in 5 are married to a working woman, and that is a lower fraction of this type of men who aren't working than was the case before. So this is not men who are living on their spouse's income.
Are they on Social Security disability?
Right, so that's another supply-side explanation, is there are more people on disability insurance today than before. But the increase in disability insurance has been much smaller than the increase in the number of men not working. Since the 1960s, about 2% more men are getting disability insurance, but the participation rate has fallen by 7.5 percentage points. So right off the bat, you can't explain the majority of the decline. Then when you look harder, it turns out that a lot of the disability insurance probably is caused by the men not working, didn't cause it. And then outside of disability insurance, the government is much less generous today than before. It's harder to get unemployment insurance, it's harder to get welfare. If you're an able-bodied man, it's harder to get food stamps. So everything else has actually gone down and become less generous.
Right, so one possibility is that these men just don't want to work. They've decided not to work. Another possibility is that they actually would like to work, but they can't find a job, or the wages aren't high enough to get them off the couch.
Right, and that's what I would call a demand-side explanation. The amount that employers want to hire them for some reason has gone down. And that is consistent with the evidence we see in aggregate, and it's consistent with what we see in the state. So let me explain both of those. The first is fewer people want to hire people with less education, without a high school degree. If that's the case, you would predict two things would happen. One, you'd predict they'd have lower wages, and the second is you'd predict fewer of them would be hired, and that's exactly what we've seen. So I think the same reduction in the demand for skilled labor, which has come because of the nature of technological...
Reduction in demand for unskilled labor.
For unskilled labor, right. Which has come because the nature of technological change is to increasingly reward people with skills. I think that's manifested itself both in greater inequality, but also in this perhaps even worse thing of men not working.
So basically, the men aren't looking for work, but your hypothesis is that they're not looking for work because they pretty much know that no one wants to hire them, or if they got a job, it wouldn't be enough money to justify the cost of working or whatever else.
Exactly. And then there's also can be something that is self-fulfilling of that, which is that if you're not in a job for a while, you become less skilled at searching for a job and less attractive to employers and may get stuck in that state.
Okay, so when we look at the economy as a whole and the unemployment rate's down, so somebody's getting jobs, the employers are hiring a couple 100,000 jobs last month added. Why should we worry about this decline in the fraction of prime-age men who have jobs?
I think we should worry about it. First of all, understand it's quite large. The difference between a recession and a normal economic period is maybe 2 percentage points on the employment population ratio. When it goes up by 2 percentage points,
like,
we think we're coming down.
That's a couple million people, right?
Right. So this is something that's more like 10 percentage points, stretched over a longer period of time, but you're talking about something that in some sense is bigger than the difference between a recession and a boom. And the impact it has, the evidence is it's very clear that for some of these people it's a choice. Not everyone needs to work, not everyone should work. But when you're talking about someone who's not married, who has less than a high school degree, there's a good chance it's not a choice. And it's associated with, with depression, with drug use, with suicide, with a range of bad outcomes for people.
So, it must be a pool of about in the neighborhood of 10 million, close to 10 million men we're talking about, men who are over age 25, under age 54, 54, but are not even bothering.
It's millions.
Yeah. So, what do we do about it?
I think it's really important to understand, while I do think technology and demand have played a role, they can't fully explain it because some countries have done a much better job than the United States has over time. We've actually had a much bigger decline than all but one other OECD economy. So to me, that's proof that we actually can do something about it.
Let me just stop you there. So there's a trend in other advanced economies?
In other advanced economies, you've seen some downtrend. Not everywhere. Germany, for example, has seen an increasing labor force participation rate for prime-age men. In general, it's been down, but a much more gradual downtrend than we've seen in the United States. And those countries remain higher.
Right. So that's something unique here that we could fix.
Right, exactly. So I think that means this is caused by policy and institutions, not caused by technology, which is to say we shouldn't accept it as inevitable. There's a range of things we need to do. Some aren't even motivated by this problem, but education is one of the biggest differences between whether you're likely to have a job or not likely to have a job. So expanding education, expanding access to college. Having labor market institutions that do a better job of helping people find work. So we spend 0.1% of GDP on what are called active labor market policies, helping people search for jobs. The average in the OECD is 0.6% of GDP, 6 times what we're spending in the United States. And we could incorporate that into unemployment insurance, that as you're getting closer to the end of your benefits, we'll do more to help you find a job. That's a second thing. Third, a little bit less for men, but it matters for men, probably matters more for women, is having more flexible workplaces where we're subsidizing childcare, having paid leave, sick leave, other things that make it more possible to stay in a job. Those are three of the sets of things that I would do.
But you said earlier that one reason that you thought that these men were not looking for work is that their wages weren't very high. Mm-hmm. So I thought that would imply that if we had higher minimum wage or we had more tax credits for low-wage workers, that might also be an incentive.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think you want to expand aggregate demand overall, and in particular, as manufacturing has gone down as a share of employment, investing more in areas like infrastructure could create some demand for some of the types of less skilled men that we're worried about here. Expanding incentives to work. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a really effective, proven incentive. Right now, we're very generous with families with children, which is appropriate, but we don't do very much for people without children. That's something that in the past Speaker Ryan had proposed and President Obama has proposed.
This is the tax credit that gives you like a cash bonus on top of your wages. That makes it, you get more for working, but your employer
right. For people who don't have children, you get an extra 15 cents for every dollar you earn, but it's very limited, the set of people and incomes for which you get that. So you could expand the amount of money and the number of people that would get that. And finally, you're exactly right, that some people say if you raise the minimum wage, it would cost jobs. Some of the evidence that that's not the case comes from the fact that a higher minimum wage means more people want to work, and they're more motivated to work and will do a better job, and that can actually offset the cost of the higher minimum wage.
So it sometimes feels a little arcane when we talk about labor force participation rates and employment to population ratios, and we talk about percentage points. So I just want to think for a minute about why you think this is a big problem. We know that some of these guys probably aren't looking very much for work. It would be good for them and good for us if they were working or at least trying to get work. But when you look at all the economic problems on the plate of the next president, why would you put this as one of the big ones?
I think that matters in two senses. It matters for the people that are affected because we'd like to see faster income growth. That's really important. There's something in some ways even worse about the lack of dignity and participation in our society and economy that comes from not working. Again, it's a great choice for many people to make, and many people make that choice, and there's all sorts of good reasons not to work, but we're talking about something that goes well beyond that. So I think there's something specifically bad for this set of people. And then second, there's a broader macroeconomic point that one of the biggest challenges we're facing to our growth rate right now is that our workforce is growing more slowly than in the past. Part of that is just that people are getting older and beginning to retire. That's terrific. It's a great thing to be able to do. We're a rich country. We can afford to support people in retirement. But it'd be great to make up for that with other ways to grow the labor force. And one of those is to take people that are here in the United States that probably would be a lot happier working and enable them to have a path to get a job that would grow the workforce, increase our growth rate, and help with all sorts of things like our fiscal sustainability.
Great. I think we're going to leave it there. This is a subject that I wrote about when I worked at the Wall Street Journal, and I've talked about on NPR. And one of the things that distinguishes this from a lot of other economic stories I've written is it inevitably, I hear from people in this age bracket, men who wish they had a job or who have had a hard time finding work or who have seen the economy change in ways that they can't adjust with. So two things. One is this is a topic that I know Jason's going to continue to focus on, and so are we here at Brookings. But secondly, if you're one of these guys or know someone and you want to share your story, let us know on Facebook or send me an email because we'd like to hear them. And Jason, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.